My MIL sent a fake eviction notice to our house, claiming she owned the property. She was smiling when we confronted her, until the real estate agent walked in and said, "Actually, you're trespassing." Alright, here it goes. This is how my mother-in-law tried to evict us from our own home and why I'm ready to go to war over it. My husband, Nate, and I bought our house 6 years ago in a quiet suburb just outside of Philadelphia. It's not a huge place, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a little yard out back where our dog loves to play. It was the first big purchase we made as a married couple, and we were proud of it. We worked hard, saved every penny, and finally got the keys to our own place. It was everything we wanted. My mother-in-law, Denise, was never thrilled about it. She's always had this way of making everything about her. When we first showed her the house, she barely looked around before saying, "It's cute, I guess." But I always pictured Nate in something bigger. She made a face like the place smelled bad. I brushed it off because, honestly, that's just how she is. Nothing's ever good enough unless it's her idea. I've always known Denise didn't like me. She's the type who believes no woman is good enough for her son. She's never outright said it, but she doesn't have to. It's in the way she talks over me, the way she forgets my birthday but always makes a big deal about Nate's, and how she constantly compares me to his XO. Remember how Jenny used to make that chicken casserole? Nate loved that, she'd say with this fake sweet smile. Still, I played nice. For Nate's sake. He's close to his mom, and I didn't want to be the one to drive a wedge between them. So I put up with her little digs and her passive-aggressive comments. I never argued when she'd drop by unannounced or when she criticized my cooking, my decorating, even my choice of dog breed. It wasn't worth the fight. Then, about 3 months ago, we got an envelope in the mail. It looked official, like something from the courthouse. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was an eviction notice. Not just any eviction notice, one that claimed we were being evicted for non-payment of rent. It said the house belonged to Denise, and we had 30 days to vacate the property. I remember sitting there, staring at the paper, my hands shaking. I read it again, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. How could Denise own our house? We bought it ourselves. Our names were on the mortgage. We never missed a payment. Nate was just as shocked as I was. At first, he thought it was some kind of prank. This has to be a mistake, he kept saying, pacing the living room. But the more we read it, the more serious it looked. It was typed up like a legal document, complete with a court case number and a signature that looked an awful lot like Denise's handwriting. Nate called his mom right away. She didn't answer. He tried again, then again. Voicemail every time. He left her messages, his voice growing more frantic with each call. "Mom, call me back. We got this weird notice, and it says you're evicting us. What's going on?" She didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. Nate was losing his mind, refreshing his phone every few minutes, waiting for her to respond. I could see the hurt in his eyes. He didn't want to believe his mom could do something like this. On the 3rd day, she finally called back. I was standing next to him when he answered, putting the call on speaker. "Oh, honey, I was just about to call you," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "What's this nonsense about an eviction notice? I have no idea what you're talking about." Nate read the letter to her word for word. There was a long pause, then she let out this little laugh. "Oh, that must be a mistake. I would never do that to you. Maybe someone stole my identity or something. You should look into that." I knew right then she was lying. I could hear it in her voice. That fake sweetness she always used when she was covering something up. But Nate wanted to believe her. He let out this huge sigh of relief, like he was glad to have an explanation. "Yeah, maybe it's just some mix-up. We'll get it sorted out." But I wasn't so sure. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was behind this. And that smug little laugh? It didn't sit right with me. I started digging. I went through every document we had on the house, checking the deed, the mortgage, every scrap of paper from the closing. Everything was in our names. There was no sign of Denise anywhere. But then, why did the eviction notice say she was the owner? I was losing sleep over it, my mind racing with questions. Could she have forged something? Did she pull some kind of legal trick? I didn't know how, but I knew she was involved. A week later, we got another letter. This one was from a lawyer, supposedly representing Denise. It demanded we vacate the property immediately or face legal action. The letter claimed that Denise had graciously allowed us to live in her house but now needed it back for her own use. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. Graciously allowed? She never even put a penny into this house. I showed the letter to Nate, and his face went pale. This can't be real, he stammered. Why would she do this? I didn't have an answer. I just knew we needed help. We went to see a lawyer. I brought every document I could find, laid them all out on his desk. He went through everything, nodding as he skimmed the papers. Then he looked up at us and said, legally, this house is yours. She has no claim to it. I felt a rush of relief, but it didn't last long. But, he continued, if she's faking legal documents, you're in for a fight. That was when it hit me. She was trying to scare us out of our own home. I remembered a conversation we had months earlier. Denise had been complaining about her apartment, saying it was too small, too noisy, too expensive. Then she'd looked around our house with this calculating gaze, and said, it's a shame you don't use that third bedroom. I could do so much with that space. At the time, I thought she was just being nosy. Now I realized she'd been planning this all along. Nate was still in shock, torn between anger and disbelief. Why would she do this to us? To me, he kept asking. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I started gathering evidence. I kept every letter, saved every voicemail, and documented every interaction. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. And I was going to make sure she regretted ever messing with us. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to this story, and I'm not backing down. Not until we get justice. Things got even crazier after that. Just when I thought Denise couldn't stoop any lower, she proved me wrong. A few days after we saw the lawyer, Nate got a call at work from his aunt, Denise's sister, Patricia. I heard his voice rise as he asked, "What are you talking about? Moving in?" My heart sank. I could only hear Nate's side of the conversation, but it was enough. He kept saying, "No, that's our house. She can't do that. No, we're not moving out." When he hung up, his face was white as a sheet. "She's been telling the whole family that we're moving out and that she's taking over the house. Patricia said she's even hired movers." I felt sick. This woman was really going through with it. She was telling people she was moving into our home before we even had a chance to fight back. I decided it was time to confront her directly. Nate wasn't thrilled about the idea, but he agreed. We drove over to her apartment, and she opened the door with that same smug smile. She didn't even pretend to be surprised to see us. "Oh, hello. What brings you by?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe like she had all the time in the world. I didn't bother with small talk. "Why are you telling people you're moving into our house?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Her eyes widened for a split second before she recovered, her smile never faltering. "Oh, I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I just figured it made sense since it's my house." I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. "It's not your house," I snapped. "We bought it. Our names are on the deed." Her expression changed then. Her eyes went cold, and her smile turned into a sneer. "You really think you deserve that house?" she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You, of all people? You're just some gold digger who tricked my son into marrying you. That house should have been mine from the start." I was stunned. I knew she didn't like me, but I never realized how deep her resentment went. Nate stepped in then, his face flushed with anger. "Mom, stop it. This is insane. You can't just take our house because you don't like my wife." She let out this bitter laugh. "I'm not taking anything. I'm just taking back what's mine. You're my son, and that house should have been yours alone. Not hers. Never hers." She looked at me with such hatred that it sent a chill down my spine. Nate was shaking. "We bought that house together. It's ours. You have no right to it." But she just shrugged, completely unfazed. "We'll see about that." Then she slammed the door in our faces. We stood there for a minute, stunned. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I turned to Nate, and I could see how hurt he was. She'd never said anything that cruel to him before. It was like she'd been saving it up, waiting for the right moment to tear us apart. We went home, but the fight was far from over. The next day, a moving truck pulled up in front of our house. I watched from the window as two men got out and started walking up the driveway. I ran outside, my heart pounding. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the movers looked down at his clipboard and said, "Yeah, we're here to move out the furniture. Is this the right address?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Who hired you? I demanded. The guy looked at his paperwork and said, Denise. She said she owns the house and that her tenants were moving out today. I was shaking with rage. I told them there was no move and that they'd been lied to. They looked confused but got back in their truck and left. I watched them drive away, my hands still trembling. She was trying to throw us out without even a court order. Just by lying and sending movers to take our things. Nate tried calling her again, but she wouldn't pick up. Then she started posting on social media about how ungrateful we were, how we were freeloaders who refused to leave her property. She was spinning this entire narrative, playing the victim, and people were buying it. Friends and family started calling, asking us why we were treating her so badly. It got worse when Nate's uncle called and started yelling at him over the phone, accusing him of abandoning his mother and stealing her house. Nate was devastated. His own family was turning against him because of her lies. And that's when I realized her plan. She wasn't just trying to take our house. She was trying to isolate us, to make us the villains so no one would be on our side. I was done playing nice. I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I printed out the fake eviction notices, saved her social media posts, and documented every interaction with the movers. I even found out which lawyer she was supposedly working with and gave him a call. Turns out, she'd never hired him. She'd faked that letter too. Meanwhile, Nate was sinking deeper into a depression. He couldn't believe his own mother was doing this to him. I tried to be strong for him, but it was hard. I felt helpless, like we were fighting a ghost. She wouldn't answer our calls, wouldn't speak to us directly, but she kept pushing, finding new ways to mess with us. One night, we came home to find a for sale sign on our front lawn. My stomach dropped. I ripped the sign out of the ground and called the real estate company listed on it. The agent I spoke to was confused. He said Denise had contacted him, claiming she was the owner and that she was ready to sell. That was it. I called our lawyer and told him everything. He said it was time to go to court. We filed a lawsuit for harassment, fraud, and attempted illegal eviction. Our lawyer also advised us to get a restraining order, just in case she tried anything else. But even as we prepared for the legal battle, I knew she wasn't done. Denise wasn't just trying to take our house. She was trying to destroy us. And she was willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate anyone who stood in her way. I don't know what her next move will be, but I'm ready. She started this war, but I'm going to finish it. Just when I thought Denise couldn't get any worse, she proved me wrong again. This woman was relentless, and it seemed like she had no limit to how far she'd go to ruin us. A week after we filed the lawsuit, Nate's boss called him into his office. When he came home that night, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I asked him what happened, and he just sat there on the couch, his head in his hands. Finally, he looked up and said, "My mom called my job. She told my boss that we were being evicted for not paying rent and that I was stealing money from her to cover it up." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe she would go that far. Nate's job was everything to him. He'd worked there for years, climbing his way up the ladder. If his boss believed her lies, he could lose everything he'd worked for. He told me his boss didn't fire him, but he did get put on probation until they could look into things. Nate was devastated. "She's trying to ruin my life," he said, his voice cracking. Why would she do this to her own son? I didn't have an answer, but I knew I couldn't let her keep doing this. I called our lawyer and told him what happened. He added defamation to our lawsuit, but he warned us that this was going to get uglier before it got better. I thought I was ready for that. I didn't realize just how ugly it would get. 2 days later, I came home from work to find police cars in front of our house. My heart jumped into my throat as I ran up the driveway. One of the officers stopped me and asked if I lived there. When I told him I did, he said, "We got a call about a break-in." The homeowner reported that squatters had taken over the property. It took me a second to process what he was saying. Squatters? This is our house, I shouted. The officer looked skeptical, glancing down at his notes. The owner, Denise, said her son and his wife were illegally staying here after she asked them to leave. She showed us documents that say she owns the property. I was shaking with anger. She actually called the cops on us. I showed the officer my ID and brought out every piece of paperwork I could find to prove that we owned the house. It took almost an hour to sort everything out, but eventually, the officers left, apologizing for the confusion. But I could see them giving me those sideways looks, like they weren't sure who to believe. That night, Nate didn't say much. He just kept staring at the wall, his face pale and drawn. I knew he was breaking inside. His own mother was trying to destroy him, and he couldn't understand why. I felt so helpless, watching him fall apart and knowing I couldn't fix it. The next day, we found out that Denise had gone to the homeowners association and filed a complaint against us, claiming we were damaging the property and bringing down the neighborhood with our illegal occupation. I was fuming. The HOA president came by to talk, and even though I showed him proof of ownership, I could tell he was suspicious. Denise had painted us as criminals, and people were starting to believe her. Then the letters started coming. Nasty, hateful letters shoved into our mailbox. Anonymous notes calling us freeloaders, thieves, and liars. One even said, "Get out before we make you." I was terrified, constantly looking over my shoulder. It felt like the whole neighborhood was turning against us because of her lies. One night, someone threw a brick through our front window. It was wrapped in paper with the word thieves scrawled across it in red ink. I called the police, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. Just teenagers playing pranks, they said. But I knew better. Denise had poisoned the neighborhood against us. I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I started leaving lights on all night, terrified that someone would try to break in. Nate was barely eating, barely talking. He was shutting down, and I was terrified I was losing him. Then came the breaking point. We woke up one morning to find "Get Out" spray-painted across our garage door in huge, dripping red letters. I collapsed right there on the driveway, sobbing. I'd been trying to be strong, trying to hold it together, but I couldn't anymore. She was destroying our lives piece by piece, and no one believed us. That's when Nate finally snapped. He stood there staring at the garage door, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Then he said, "She's not going to stop. Not until we're out on the street or worse." There was a dead look in his eyes that terrified me. I'd never seen him like that before. We went back to our lawyer, and he was shocked at how far things had gone. He told us we needed to get a restraining order immediately. But when we filed the paperwork, the judge denied it, saying there wasn't enough evidence to prove Denise was behind the harassment. I wanted to scream. She was ruining our lives, and the system was protecting her. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, we found out she'd gone to the bank. She was trying to take out a loan against our house, claiming she needed the money for repairs before selling it. I almost laughed at the audacity. She was that confident she was going to win. I was ready to fight, but Nate was breaking. He started talking about moving away, giving her what she wanted just to make it stop. "It's just a house," he whispered one night. "We can start over somewhere else." But it wasn't just a house. It was our home, our life. If we gave in, she'd win. She'd control us forever. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything she'd put us through. Not after the lies, the harassment, the damage she'd done to Nate. I knew I had to find a way to stop her, once and for all. I just didn't know how far she'd go to fight back. Things finally came to a head on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I remember the sky being dark and heavy, a storm rolling in, like the universe knew everything was about to explode. We were sitting in the living room, exhausted and defeated. The spray paint was still on the garage door because the insurance wouldn't cover it, and we didn't have the money to fix it ourselves. Nate was staring blankly at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his face hollow. I could see him slipping away from me, losing himself under the weight of his mother's lies. Then there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I looked at Nate, and his eyes were wide with fear. Neither of us moved. The knock came again, louder this time. "Open up. I know you're in there." It was Denise. I stood up, my whole body shaking. Nate grabbed my arm. "Don't," he whispered, his voice cracking. But I couldn't take it anymore. She'd stolen our peace, our security, our lives. I couldn't let her keep doing this to us. I opened the door, and there she was, standing on the porch with that smug smile on her face. She was holding a folder, waving it at me like a trophy. "Well, it's over," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I gave you enough chances to leave on your own, but since you're too stubborn to do the right thing, I had to take matters into my own hands." I could barely breathe. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She shoved the folder into my hands. "This is the official deed transfer. The house is mine now. You're trespassing on my property." I felt the world spin around me. "No, that's impossible," I stammered. "We never sold the house. We never signed anything." She let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Oh, you didn't have to. There are other ways to get what I want." I opened the folder, and my heart dropped. There it was, a deed transfer with what looked like Nate's signature at the bottom. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. It looked real. It looked legal. But I knew we never signed anything. Nate came up behind me, his face pale as he looked at the papers. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered, his voice broken. She didn't even blink. "I did what I had to do. I protected you from her," she said, pointing at me like I was some kind of monster. "I wasn't going to let her take everything from you." I was shaking with anger. "You forged his signature. That's illegal. You can't just take our house." She crossed her arms, her face cold and defiant. "I did what was necessary. You were ruining his life, dragging him down. I had to save him from you." Nate looked like he was about to collapse. You ruined my life. You cost me my job. You turned my family against me. Why would you do this?" His voice broke, tears streaming down his face. "I loved you. I trusted you." For the first time, Denise's smug expression faltered. She looked at Nate, her eyes wide with shock. "I did it for you. Everything I did was for you," she shouted, her voice trembling. "I wasn't going to let her take you away from me." Nate just stared at her, his face twisted with pain. "You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself. You couldn't stand not being in control. You couldn't let me be happy because it meant you weren't the center of my life anymore." His voice was cold, distant. "You ruined everything because you were jealous." Denise's face turned red, her hands shaking. "How dare you talk to me like that? I'm your mother. I did everything for you." She was screaming now, her face twisted in rage. "She turned you against me. She poisoned you." I stepped forward, my own anger boiling over. "I didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourself. You lied. You cheated. You tried to steal our home. You ruined your relationship with your son because you couldn't stand the fact that he chose me." She looked at me like she wanted to hit me. "You don't deserve him. You never did. You're just some pathetic gold digger who tricked him into marrying you. This was never your house. It was always mine." Nate's face went blank. He looked at his mother like she was a stranger. "Get out," he said quietly. Denise froze, her eyes wide. "What?" she whispered. He took a deep breath, his whole body shaking. "You're not welcome here. Not now, not ever. I don't have a mother anymore. Not after this." She started to cry, reaching out to him. "No, please, I did this for you. I was just trying to protect you." But Nate stepped back, his face cold and empty. "You did this for yourself. You destroyed everything because you couldn't stand not being in control. I can't forgive you for this. Get out." Denise broke down, sobbing, but Nate didn't move. He stood there, staring at her like she was nothing. Finally, she turned and ran down the driveway, her sobs echoing through the rain. I watched her go, my heart pounding. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was hollow. Nate sank to the floor, his body shaking as he sobbed. I held him, my own tears falling as I realized just how deep her betrayal went. She didn't just try to take our house. She tried to destroy us. And in doing so, she lost her son forever. The legal battle was long and brutal. We had to prove the deed was forged, which meant dragging Nate through more pain as he testified against his own mother. But we won. The house was legally ours, and Denise was exposed as a fraud. She lost everything, her reputation, her family, her son. But there was no victory in it. Nate was broken. He stopped talking to his family, cut off from everyone he'd ever known. The pain ran too deep, the betrayal too severe. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in that third bedroom, staring at the empty walls, tears running down his face. I didn't know how to help him, how to bring him back from the darkness she'd left him in. I thought winning the house would make things better, but all it did was remind us of what we lost. I don't know if Nate will ever heal. I don't know if I can save our marriage. Denise took more than just our house. She took our peace, our happiness, and left us with scars that might never fade. I don't feel victorious. I feel empty. She didn't just lose. We all did.